This week, Sir Joel Bennathan KC overturned the conviction of Hamit Coskun, the man prosecuted for burning a Koran. The judge reminded us all of a vital truth. There is no offence of blasphemy in the English law. The Crown Prosecution Service tried to sneak in a backdoor blasphemy law punishing someone simply for offending religious feelings. But Justice Bennathan wasn't having it, saying freedom of expression must include the right to offend, shock or disturb. This ruling is a clear win for free speech, though it doesn't set legal precedent. Unfortunately, the CPS, meanwhile, refuses to admit fault and shows no sign of stopping these disturbing prosecutions for offensive speech. Joining me now to discuss this is the justice and crime journalist David Shipley. David, welcome to the show. David, I would argue this is a pivotal moment, a turning moment for this country. If this had been allowed to stand, I don't know what our country would look like in 10 years' time, frankly.
Yeah, I think had the appeal not been allowed, we clearly would have an Islamic blasphemy law and a law in which, you know, a man who burned a Koran would have been punished and the man who attacked him with a knife would have been allowed to go free. And that would be terrifying. I don't think we've won, though. I think the reality is the CPS, as you just mentioned, essentially tried to create a blasphemy law. You know, initially they tried...
By racial incitement or racial... They used the word, it was racial incitement.
Well, it's been forgotten now, but the initial charge was that he was offending the religious institution of Islam. And public order law in this country says you can't commit a public order offence against an institution. So the CPS lawyers, we don't know which lawyers there, invented a whole law and charged him with it. It was only when the press caught on to it and we made noise that they said, oh, well, we didn't mean that, it's a mistake, but here's the new charge. And they carried on persecuting Hamit over this act, which is really concerning, I think. Yeah, I mean, has there been any level of responsibility taken? Anybody in the CPS who's answered for this or even just said, look, we got it wrong, we've learned our lesson? None at all. So I went and got a comment from them just after the appeal was allowed this week. And their whole attitude seems to be, we followed the processes, everything's fine, we didn't do anything wrong, nothing to see here. I asked them if they were going to review how they approach these kind of speech offences, would they look at other prosecutions that are underway? Nothing. So they, like much of the civil service, I think, have this attitude that as long as they follow the process, all's good, and they are very, very unwilling to admit fault. Well, this is it, but it's not. This isn't following the process. This is inventing a process, and that's the particularly worrying part of it. For the people who aren't aware of this case, this is a Turkish man, an ex-Muslim, who stood in front of the Turkish consulate, I believe, and burned his copy of the Quran. Now, we can certainly disagree with that. We might think it might be morally wrong. Whatever it is, the point is it's not illegal, certainly in this country. And someone walking past went in, he said, I'm going to kill you. He went and got his bread knife and came out, and we saw video footage of him slashing and trying to... And then a passerby even spitting on him and kicking him while he was down. And that passerby has never been caught, of course. He just rode off on his... I'm sure the police really looked hard for him. Well, yes, I'm sure. But yeah, I think this is... I mean, it must have been hard to find him because he was a Deliveroo drivers, or he was one of those drivers. So few of them, so few. How would they possibly know who ordered the food around that time and area? It would take Sherlock Holmes to be able to solve such a crime. You'd have to phone up Deliveroo and ask some data or something. It'd be impossible. I think I should say I don't think it's morally wrong to burn a Koran. I think the... but some people might, is the point. But it's not illegal, is the point. And absolutely shouldn't be illegal. I think the really disturbing thing here is we see this again and again and again. Islamic preferences are becoming pushed into law. You know, no one should be prosecuted for burning a Koran. It's a perfectly legitimate act of protest in a free country. We are not yet, thank God, an Islamic theocratic dictatorship. So this should never have even resulted in arrest. And the fact that there are people within the police and within the Crown Prosecution Service who took this all the way should chill us. Well, of course, I mean, if it had been the Bible or the Torah, I don't believe that this would have in any way gone to that point, let alone arrest, let alone going forward through the CPS. You know, people... Well, we've had 2 years of people saying terrible things about Jewish people on the streets of London. You know, Christianity is criticised and attacked all the time, and no one ever gets prosecuted for it. So no, of course it wouldn't have resulted in prosecution were it other religions. And I think the issue is that, you know, many Muslims react with a lot of anger when they feel their beliefs are criticised or threatened. We saw a few years ago that schoolboy who brought a Koran into school, and in a sort of schoolyard tussle, it got a bit scuffed, and I think a page got torn slightly. And you had 130 imams writing into the to the school saying, this is terrible, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. This is an inherently sort of fragile, angry response to perceived slights. And these people who make huge noise and come up with all these threats do seem to be compelling the institutions.
Well, I think the most shameful thing, if anybody remembers the footage at the time, was the police and the school organised a sort of press conference where the mother was kind of shamed in front of all of these Muslim men and kind of almost seemingly pleading for her child's life, as opposed to the police doing their job, which is if someone makes a threat or a death threat of violence, you go out and arrest them.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is this cowardice, right? This tendency to say, oh, let's just go along with this, let's manage community relations. And actually, it's exactly the same tendency that we saw with the Muslim rape gangs. The tendency to say, we'll just try to keep a lid on this, we don't want to cause trouble, we won't actually say what's going on, we won't name the problem. And it's deadly if we allow this to continue.
Well, you're kicking the can down the road. I think the most insidious part of this whole case for me was in the initial finding, in the initial judgment, it was the fact that the gentleman who went out to stab him was offended, was so grievously offended that kind of proved the case that he should then be found guilty.
And the CPS barrister in the appeal was still pushing that argument, saying that the mere fact that someone was angry enough to go and get a knife proved that this was a provocative act. And that's crazy. That's pure victim blaming. To say that, oh, well, the fact that someone attacked you for this proves that you did a bad thing. It makes no sense at all.
Well, it's not. But it's not that it also makes no sense. But it's just, as I say, the legal precedent for it. The whole point. And as this judgment has come through from the new judgment, basically saying that you don't have the right in this country to not be offended. I mean, this is one of the core foundations of free speech. And yet, when you have the lower courts essentially saying, if you are offended, you are right to be able to go out and stab somebody, then it just flips it totally around. The entirety of our society becomes about who's most offended then.
Of course, and it gives people who say they're offended a right to veto any speech they don't like, which would be chilling. And I think I'm often quite quick to criticise judges who I think have got it wrong. And I should say that Justice Bennathan, his judgment was incredible. He really made it very clear that this was a free speech issue.
It was a beautiful thing to read. The sad part of it is that it's not sort of legally binding for other cases, is that right?
That's right, yeah. Because this was held in a Crown court, so Justice Bennathan with two magistrates, it's not binding in the same way that a sort of full High Court appeal hearing would be. It is, I understand, likely to be sort of considered helpful to future appeal courts, but we aren't safe, and I think we need to actually get new legislation to make this very clear.
Have you seen any evidence of politicians speaking up to try and force the CPS to kind of take some responsibility for what's going on, so that there are obviously individuals within the CPS who are working to push forward a blasphemy law by backdoor? This is not a conspiracy, this is just exactly what we've seen. Unless someone's held to account, there's nothing to stop them from trying it again.
Yeah, Robert Jenrick, I think, has been quite vocal in this. So he attended the appeal, and he has been sort of putting out social media messaging, talking about the CPS issue. But that's where we need to look. Like you said, the CPS has tried to create new law, which itself is incredibly undemocratic and insidious. Law should be made by Parliament. This is fairly basic. And we have this situation where civil servants with no democratic right are inventing law in a way which would restrain our speech rights. We have to get to the bottom of this. We need to find out who within the CPS actually drafted that charge, who approved it, and actually how many other cases have there been where they've used this term, the religious institution of Islam, as a victim. Because there may be many. I've been trying to get this information out to them via Freedom of Information requests for some months now, and they are resisting it throughout. So we need to get to the truth.
Absolutely. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us. I really hope that they have learned their lesson. I suspect not.